So, you wanna know how to render your artworks like this? Then you're at the right place. And you know what? It's actually very easy. It's because I've divided the coloring process into 5 steps: the base color, shadow 1, shadow 2, highlights, subsurface scattering, and finally, bloom or bounce light, whatever you wanna call it. Oh, it's actually 6. For those of you who don't know what subsurface scattering is, it's actually when light penetrates a surface and gets scattered, but the scattered light stays on the surface. Look, I know it's pretty hard for your monkey brains to understand this physics stuff. So in short, this saturated line at the edge of the shadow is subsurface scattering. But before you jump into coloring, because I know that you're dying to color that ugly waifu you just made, you need to decide the light source first. So for this artwork, let's assume this is where the light comes from. So first, we start by adding the gradient base using the gradient tool, and of course, the side which is facing the light source has a lighter shade. Then we add the first shadow, and let me tell you, please, please don't you ever try to pick the perfect color for the shadow from the color wheel. You see, it doesn't work like this. The shadow has to blend in with the base. So what you actually do is, you pick a super saturated color from the wheel and then you lower the opacity of the shadow layer. This way, the shadow blends with the base. So for the shirt, I'm using this blue color, and for the skin, I'm using this dark purple color. And then when I lower the opacity, boom. This also gives you the opportunity to adjust the opacity and see what works best for the artwork. And then we add shadow 2, which is the darker shadow, and it's generally the same color as that of the shadow 1. So what I like to do is, I use a textured brush and try to blend it with the shadow 1, but not too much, just a little bit, because I want to leave some texture there. You can also use the airbrush tool if you want to. For here, I'm not gonna use shadow 2. Instead, what I'm going to do is use very thin lines of shadow 1 and try to represent the flow of the hair using those lines. Now listen carefully, because I'm about to enlighten you. You don't actually have to make the details. You need to give the illusion of detail. And these thin lines get the job done. Now it's time for the highlights. I'm not gonna make highlights for the skin because most of the skin is already in the light. I'll just add some glow on the nose at the end. And now for my favorite part, subsurface scattering, guys. So what you do is, you outline the highlights or the shadows. So for the shirt highlight, I outlined it with green, reddish orange for the shadow on the skin, and yellowish orange for the highlights on the hair. Now also for my favorite part, bloom and bounce light. So the color you used for subsurface scattering will also serve as the bloom. And if it ends up looking too bright, you can use the lighter shade of that color. So gently use your airbrush over subsurface scattering. And see, it's already looking so beautiful now. And now, also my favorite part. Oh gosh, I have so many favorite parts. We add the blush to the skin and those lips. And for this, I use the airbrush tool. And then we make a new layer and add some details, like some hair strands. And now the final step, which will actually elevate this artwork to a whole another level. You make a new layer over the line art, clip it to the line art, use your airbrush tool, and select the subsurface scattering color and color over the line art with that. As you can see, I've used green here, orange here, and also orange here. This just makes the light more prominent and interesting. And we are done. So to wrap it up, use a gradient base color, apply shadow 1, which is the lighter shadow, shadow 2, which is the darker shadow, highlights, then subsurface scattering, then some bloom and bounce light, and don't you ever forget to color over the line art. And remember one thing, these are no rigid rules. This is how I actually color in my own art style, which I have developed after taking something from many artists and combining it all together. So I just wanted to share my workflow with you guys. Follow me on Instagram, guys, please.